Laurie Houston's News for the Heart is dedicated to helping you give a voice to your own soul. Our hearts have the power to free us from pain and the struggles that keep us from awakening to our true essence. Join Laurie now as we delve into our heart and soul to find the path that will open us to the possibilities and lead us to the life we love to live.
And good afternoon. This is News for the Heart, and I'm here with my awesome co-host, Tom Campbell. I can't believe it's the last day of the month. This has been such a crazy year so far. This month has been crazy, especially weather-wise. I know we talk about weather, but you know I'm from Toronto, so I get to do that. But one day we had 16 degrees, which is like 62, and then the next day we had like minus 30, which is, probably around minus 20 something Fahrenheit. So we just have had crazy weathers. It's just, anyway. So welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you, Laurie. It's always good to be here.
I thought we would talk about an interesting post that happened in January. So I almost thought I'd talk about it in February, but of course we always talk about Love Month in February. So I thought it would be fun to discuss because it was this bright orange and it said, Tom says there's no spirit world. And I thought, okay, he's probably talking about metaphors or which we've discussed before, but I'm just curious. I thought we'd start there and see where it goes, but I thought that would be a fun conversation because a lot of people seem to be interested in it. So yes. Tom says there's no spirit world. Let's discuss that. Maybe first beginning with the definition of what spirit world is.
Yeah. What is that person talking about? What are they thinking of in terms of a spirit world? Because I can think of some ways in which I would say, well, yes, indeed, there's a rich experience base within the, realm of spirit or the realm of consciousness or the realm of the non-physical, so in that sense, it would be, that's not so. Tom does say there's a rich interaction that can be had within the world of, within the larger consciousness system. But on the other hand, if it means that, all those spirits are out there, moving around, they get up in the morning just like we do, have a cup of coffee, go to work, they do whatever they do, they hang out with us and fly around along with us and answer our questions. And, if it's very literal in that sense, then Tom would say that there is no spirit world in that sense. So it's a matter of how literally or how figuratively you want to take it. Figuratively, Tom does say that there's a lot of action going on in the non-physical. If you take it literally, Tom says, no, it doesn't work like that. That's in your mind, that's your connections. You're interacting with databases, you're interacting with memory, you are, in participation with a larger consciousness system. You're, doing those things. And it's not that when you die, you have a spirit that then lives in the spirit world and does all the things that spirits do. It's not that literal, although the result, as far as how you can interact with it, is pretty much the same. The result's not the issue. It's the, how literally do you take that? And if it's, I know there are lots of people who take it very literally, and with them, I have no really disagreement with that because the interactions they're having, the connections, they're talking to their grandma or their ancestors or, whatever it is that's in their, in their space, that's fine. And all that's going on and all that's real enough and all of that has real effects. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is the way it seems. Things can seem that they're a certain way, and we tend to interpret things in terms of what we know. And what we know is that we go outside and we go to parties and we see people and we see our in-laws and our ex-laws and outlaws and, we interact, we have jobs, we have pets, we have houses to take care of and neighbors, and we interact with all of this stuff, and it's all out there, and we interact with it. And then we go into the world of consciousness, And it's just natural for a lot of people just to duplicate that. The world of consciousness is just like that. There's a lot of things out there, and there's people, and you go see them, and they see you, and they have jobs, and you have jobs, and you meet at the park, and so they basically take their experiences in the non-physical, and they put it into the same context as their experiences in the physical, because that's what they know. That's how they perceive the data. You get the data, and then you interpret the data. And people tend to interpret the data in terms of their beliefs. And if you have a belief that, the non-physical is just like the physical, but different, then you'll see it in a very literal way. It'll be just like life here, except it's not here, it's there. And you interact in the same way you do here, and so on. So that's where I think that comes from. So I get along fine with that, because the actual fact of it, that they are interacting, that they are, getting information, that something's going on there that they can learn from and grow from and connect to. Yes, that's all true. So it's not that they're just going off on their imagination, although some may, and some may be part of their imagination and not part of their imagination. It doesn't matter. The imagination is just as valuable as non-imagination. It's all information and experience that we can grow from. So all of that's fine. So it's not like anybody who thinks that spirit world is sort of physical spirit world that's just not physical to us, but otherwise it works very much in a similar way. Then that's just their own metaphor for how they interpret the data they get, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I tend to not make my interpretations be, that way. I tend to keep everything as simple as possible and straightforward as possible. And I don't like to add anything into my model that doesn't have to be there. Adding something that's just could be there or sounds good or feels nice, I try to avoid all that. I try to only put things in my model that logic demands that they have to be there. So that my model's very, sparse, very spare model in that sense. So when I talk about, connecting with a larger consciousness system, well, I just keep it at the larger conscious system rather than say, well, in the system, you've got guides and you've got this and you've got that, and you can make a whole pantheon and a whole very complicated thing with 57 levels, and, you can do all that, but none of that is logically necessary. It doesn't have to be in the model in order for the model to work. You see, so it doesn't mean that all of that's wrong. It just means it's not logically necessary. So my model is very sparse in that way. But other people should feel free to interpret their experiences however they do. I would not encourage anybody to say, oh, according to Tom Campbell, I'm wrong. It's not about right and wrong. Don't feel wrong if you disagree with me. Disagreeing with me and being wrong are not the same thing. That's very different. You're not wrong. You're just interpreting things in your own way, according to your experiences, and you're putting it in that context. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. So you want to interact in your spiritual world in a very literal way. That's fine. That's not wrong. And it's not that doesn't exist. What we're talking about really is just information. It's all about information, the exchange of information, the communications, the connections. That information is all real. The way you interpret it and the background you give it, that's up to you. You do that in your own way, whatever feels right to you. So you see, the answer to that question is yes. Tom, does not take that literally in his model, but it's okay, and it's not a wrong thing to do. It's just the way you interpret the data. I don't interpret data that way because I want my data to stay as clean and as pure and as simple, uncluttered as possible. So I don't add anything to it that doesn't have to be there. That's just what I try to do. But that's because I come from a science background. If I didn't come from a science background, I may not feel that way about it. But I come from a science background, and my science background says keep it as simple as possible. Models that are very simple and very elegant and have the fewest assumptions are most likely to be correct. If you have lots and lots of assumptions, which you will start having if you have that spirit world, because what do the spirits do all day, and how do they spend their time, and what's their point, and do they get bored with that? How do they do this? How do they do that? And now you have to build up a whole infrastructure to support that. What do they eat? Do they still eat? Do they still do this? Do they still do that? Do they need energy? Does their energy wear out? There's lots and lots of then questions and assumptions. Well, let's make an assumption. No, they don't eat. No, the energy doesn't wear out. But these are all assumptions, that we make in order to make it sound reasonable to us. Well, that's okay. But now you've got this basket full of assumptions that has to go with that worldview. And I try to keep my model such that it has the fewest possible number of assumptions that you need in order to get there. So even though I'll talk about, yes, there are guides, but that's just your interface, your own private interface to the larger consciousness system, rather than there's this spirit out there and we call it a guide and it follows us around and answers our questions. That's a very literal interpretation. And that's what it seems like to us. From our viewpoint, it seems like, because we ask questions, we talk, we interact with that guide, and it seems just like interacting with somebody on the internet or interacting with somebody here. In this reality, it seems very much like that. So we tend to see it that way. But that's not really what's going on, because then that starts to take extra assumptions to decide, well, what's that being doing? What are they doing when I'm not asking a question? What else do they do? And how interesting is their life, sitting around waiting for the phone to ring and me to ask them a question? And would that be a good job to have? And what are the other things? What kind of relationships do they have? Do they get married? Do they whatever? And it's like, well, no, they don't do that. And then it's like, well, a life without relationships, wouldn't that be kind of sterile? It's kind of dry if it was just you and what you thought, it was all just kind of in your mind. And so you get all these things come up, you see. So you keep it simple and all that stuff just disappears, and you can say, well, it's just me talking to the larger conscious system. And the system gives me my own interface, and that's what I interpret as my guide. And I interpret as a guide because to me, it's like a person. I talk to it, it talks back, I can see it, we can sit down and have a conversation. So it interacts with me like a person. So I call it a guide because it gives me guidance and gives me information. But that doesn't mean that there's literally a being, that is performing that. It's just information. And information is more simply described as the system. Let that be it, without trying to make up anything else, because nothing else really works out very well without a lot of extra assumptions and things added to it. So it's kind of unnecessary. Now I say unnecessary, but that's really my preference. It's unnecessary to me. It's not necessarily unnecessary to other people. Other people who have a hard time with that kind of an abstract view that I have. See, I'm a scientist. I deal in abstractions all the time. I think in terms of abstractions, not necessarily that literally. So for me, that's the better way to go. For somebody else who doesn't think that way, who isn't a scientist, who has a hard time dealing with these big abstract, models like mine, then dress it up whatever, in every way that it feels good to you. That's fine. That's not an error. That's not you being wrong. That's just you interpreting the data in ways that make sense to you. And if you are like that, and you tend to think in those ways and interpret things in that ways, then I suspect that The fact that there's extra assumptions is not a problem for you. That's probably just fine. You don't worry about, does my guide have relationships with other guides? And if they do, is he happy or is he struggling, like I am, You don't, none of that really occurs. You never think of that, or it just doesn't come up, and that's okay. So the idea of we might say believing in a spirit world is just something that's convenient to some people, and they feel comfortable with that. I don't feel comfortable with any beliefs. If I find a belief, I try to get rid of it. I like to keep things down to the bare bones. But it doesn't make my way right and their way wrong. It just makes my way and their way a different way of interacting with the same sorts of things. So that's what I mean when I say, no, there is no spirit world. In my sense, I say that is a metaphor that I don't need, because it just complicates things.
Okay.
So did that make sense?
Yes. I think I want further clarification, though. Like when we go into Tom's Park and we meet up with we meet up sometime with the physical, but also sometimes with the non-physical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, there's still obviously information that you get that is incredibly useful. There's obviously sometimes, if you have fear, you're going to get maybe fearful choices or fearful information or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess people get confused because they think, well, if we're doing this work, and how do I put this in the way that I'm trying to understand it? Okay, so I get the bit about it can be sort of a metaphor. So there is no, Uncle Bob. What do you usually say?
Uncle Fred. Uncle Fred.
Right.
Uncle Fred, yeah. Because it rhymes with dead. Dead Uncle Fred. Yes.
I should know that because I had him Fred. Yeah, so there's no Uncle Fred out there that's, watching over us and guiding us and showing us, although there is a consciousness that if we connect in with it, we can still receive that guidance, and it can still feel like it's someone we know, and we can still feel good about it. I mean, I think about all the people that talk about spirit guides, like you said, is it a job we do after? And then I think about relationships, and I know that there are relationships that, can be karmic and soul group. And, but when we get to that, is that really how you see it? Or is that just how we're trying to create importance in our relationships? Is that like, do you know what I mean by that?
Well, I think we have ideas and we have feelings and we have communications, and these are all real.
Right.
But most people have a hard time just leaving them be without kind of dressing them up in familiar clothes, if you will. Making them, making them friendlier, making them more, homey, like it's Uncle Fred. That just makes it feel better. It's my ancestors. They do that because that is softer, that is warmer, that is easier for them to think of it in those terms. So they do. And that's okay. So that's just the way they're thinking of it. But yes, the communication's there, and it's not necessarily that Uncle Fred is following you around and giving you good advice, but the system cares about you because your success is its success. You increase the quality of your consciousness and you're part of it, then the whole system gets a little plus up because of your good work. So it wants you to succeed. So you've got a system that has a vested interest in helping you out. So it sees you struggling and there's just this kind of comprehension or aha that you need, it will try to get you that. Now, if when you get that, it would freak you out if you thought that was coming from some giant computer in the sky or something like that. If that's if you tend to be literal in that way, then that doesn't feel warm and good. That's your Uncle Fred, your favorite Uncle Fred. You see, somebody that you love and care about and knew well and had special relationship with. Now that feels a lot better and feels a lot warmer, and it just makes, it kind of cuddles up to our ego much more than if it's a very, I don't know, if it doesn't have all that warm, you don't dress it up in all those warm clothes, so that's why people do it. Now, people like me who are scientists, we like that very barren landscape, if you like, that doesn't have anything in it except what necessarily has to be there. And we look at that and see that as beautiful. We see that as elegance. We see that as nothing but what needs to be there. And that to us is the kind of the minimum set of things. And for that, we find beauty and warm feelings and feel good about that. But other people say, oh, that's so cold, that's so sterile, that's so, I really don't like your computer metaphors because it's just so cold and sterile and doesn't have any warmth or life to it. Well, that's just because you need warm, cuddly metaphors. Well, make up some warm, cuddly metaphors, use them. They're okay. It's not that, you're still getting the same information, so it's all right to have a warm, cuddly metaphor. I don't do that because it just clutters my thinking with things that the way my mind works, if I see that that's Uncle Fred, now I need to know how Uncle Fred got there, how he got that job, what he does when he's not talking to me. See, I'm a scientist and I want to know all those things about Uncle Fred. And I have this big bunch of stuff that now needs explanation. And people who aren't scientific in the way they think, they probably don't need any of that. Okay, Uncle Fred's around when I need him, and that's all I need to know. And whether that has any logic to it or not, it's not important. It just is the way it is, you see. So different people have different metaphors for things. So, and that's all right. It's not that they're wrong and I'm right, or I'm wrong and they're right. That's not the way to look at it. It's not a right or wrong. They do it in a way that makes sense and feels good to them.
Right.
Now, the only thing that can sometimes get in the way, that if you have lots of elaborate structures around things, and some spiritualists do, where, there's 14 levels of this and that, and then the ascended masters are on top of that, and then there's this, and then, sometimes there's all this structure, and people can get so wound up and lost in my structure's right and their structure's wrong, and mine's better than theirs, and we have all this, that they forget about the basic idea, which is love and caring and growing up, and they get wound up inside of structures and explanations for those structures and which structure's right and which ones are wrong, and that becomes important enough to fight about and have arguments about, and now that's all dysfunctional. So that's one of the advantages of just keeping it clean, is that you don't create any arguments because your metaphors are different than somebody else's metaphors. You just keep your metaphors as simple as possible, and don't don't feel like your metaphors are right. They're metaphors. It's just how we explain things to ourselves. So as long as we don't take those metaphors too seriously, you see, if we take them too seriously, then we create dogma. We create, belief systems. And those things just get in the way. They become an extra burden as far as our understanding goes. So in my world of science, all that gets thrown away. And I don't like to do that. But I know that others don't think like that. And for me to say, well, if you're really going to understand it, you have to think like that. Well, that's very arrogant. I wouldn't say that. You know, you can think about it how any way it makes sense to you, but don't get lost in your own, in your own creations. Don't get lost in your own metaphors to where the metaphor becomes more important than the content of the message. You see, and that's what happens. That's why religions want to fight with each other. That's why, you know, we have what Buddhists and Islam over in Pakistan or whatever, and they fight with each other. And we have Catholics and Protestants in Ireland that were fighting with each other. And we have religious wars because they take their metaphors so literally and so seriously that the other person is not only wrong, but so wrong that they need to be eliminated. And that creates just lots and lots of trouble. It's better if we say, well, people look at things and see things and interpret them in different ways. And don't get too tied to the way that you see it. It's just the way that you see it, and just let it be that way. You don't have to turn that into a belief system. Just let it be. If you do turn it into a belief system, it's just extra baggage you have to carry around that's non-functional. And it'll just get you in arguments, make it hard for you to understand other people who have different belief systems. It just gets in the way. So that's what I've got to say about that spiritual space out there, that Tom doesn't believe in. I don't believe in anything. I try not to believe in anything. It's just the stuff I experience, and it's my experience. And I don't say my experiences are right and anybody else's experiences are wrong. That would also be very arrogant. They're just my experiences, and here's my model. This is what my model looks like. And if you can use it and that helps you understand, or you can hang your own experience onto that model, then great. And if you can't, and you can't use it, well, then don't, leave it alone. Create something that's more suitable to yourself. It's not a matter of right and wrong. It's a matter of growing up, caring, becoming love. And you can become love whether you've ever heard of my model or not. My model doesn't have a, I can't think of the word on love. You can't only get there through my model, obviously. There's thousands of ways you can get there. My model's just a way. And if you find it helpful, that it kind of resolves issues and gives you a kind of a clearer way of thinking about it and seeing yourself and explaining your own experiences, then good, use it. Otherwise, don't use it. Do something else. You can still get to the point of growing up and becoming love, no matter how you see things. All the how you see things is all an intellectual thing. Growing up is not about intellectual stuff. It doesn't matter what kind of intellectual structure you create. The intellectual stuff is all just stuff that you make to make your world seem more rational. Right. That's all it is. The important stuff isn't the intellectual stuff. The important stuff is, how do you feel? How does it help you grow up? How do you have relationships? How much do you care about others? How self-centered are you? Those are the things that really matter. And you can have any kind of intellectual construction and still grow up within that construction. There are people who are very, very religious, and they get lost in dogma and want to fight other people who disagree with them. And there are people who are very, very religious who grow up and become love and are wonderful people. You see, whether you're religious or not is really irrelevant. It's you, the person inside. The rest of it's just intellectual structure that you create because of beliefs, because of your family, because of your culture, because of all kinds of things. And you create this intellectual pattern or structure, and you use it to help you understand the world. But the intellectual structure you build will not help you grow up any. You have to be kinder, be more caring, And you don't become anything through the intellect. The intellect does analysis. There's that being level, which is the real you. And that's what grows up. That's what's important. So if you have this particular pile of description in your intellect, or that particular pile of description in your intellect, it doesn't really make any difference as long as your own models don't make it more difficult for you to grow up, because you get lost in the dogma and miss the whole point about love. The structure becomes important. The symbols become important. And at that point, you're probably de-evolving, because you're missing the boat altogether. You're all wound up in, my religion's right, your religion's wrong, or my spirit world is right and your lack of a spirit world is wrong, or whatever. If you get into that, then you lose the bubble of what's really important. So that's another reason for keeping it simple. It's harder to get wound up in things if you keep it simple, and it's harder to kind of get trapped in beliefs of your own making if you keep it simple. So that's one of the reasons I do that. But people have to do it their own way.
Okay, so we grow up mostly through relationships. We have all sorts of different types of relationships. We've had some very interesting last few years where a lot of those relationships ended for various reasons, but a lot of them because of death. So most people are thinking, oh, when I pass, at least I'll be with, at least they'll be there for me. By your model, from my understanding, is we just keep repeating. We keep going. We get to have another opportunity to grow up every time. Yes. So these people that leave, do they automatically come back? Do they come back because, do we all come back together in different ways? We're not the same person as we've grown and evolved, hopefully. Uncle Fred is not going to come back as Uncle Fred. Might come back as Aunt Sally, might come back as a daughter, might come back, I don't know, anything, as long as it's helping us grow.
Right.
Is that
right? Yeah. So that's right. When we die, as soon as we are able to make all the proper adjustments, we go back and get another life, another experience packet in which to make choices. That's how we evolve, by making choices. And here in this particular virtual reality we call the physical universe, there are lots and lots of important choices to make. If we don't go back to a kind of a physical like virtual reality like this one, there's still choices to make, but they're not as rich and there's not as varied, and your decision space isn't as wide. So that's why we tend to go back. You don't have to. Nobody makes you do anything. You've got free will and you can say no. But we tend to say, okay, yeah, let's go back, because that's where you have the greatest opportunity to grow up, is in a place where you have lots of meaningful choices. And that's what this reality was created for, was to give us a lot of meaningful choices. So yes, you do that. So, you go back, you now are, instead of Uncle Fred, now you're, Chinese or black or whatever, English, or you're something else. You're female now, and instead of being wealthy like Uncle Fred, you're dirt poor. You're digging the dirt with sticks someplace in a jungle. And it's just completely different. And the experiences of that incarnation are totally different. But you bring the quality that you've earned to that experience, and you make choices, because no matter what your experience is, whether it's digging in the dirt with a stick, in some jungle, or whether you're, in a penthouse, lounging in your hot tub, you still have choices. You still have relationships. You still have parents and siblings and family and neighbors and other people around you. There's still things to do. There's important things. You have to find food. You have to find shelter. You have to do the things you have to do. And all of those require important choices into how you act, what you do. How helpful are you? How much do you care? How self-centered are you? You see, it doesn't really matter. They all give you opportunities. But the way you grow up and how you express who you are in that being where you dig in the dirt with a stick is going to be very, very different than what you were in Uncle Fred, wealthy Uncle Fred. You're going to be very different, and you're going to see life differently. And that's wonderful because now you have different opportunities, different choices. Because if every lifetime you had basically a replay of the same choices, you would stall out. You'd kind of stop growing and wouldn't grow up very much. The diversity of your decision space and of your choices is what really helps you grow up much more quickly. So you wouldn't want to just repeat the same thing with the same people in the same way. Oh, let's just do it again and do it again. And I'll always be your father and you always be my little girl. And we'll just go on and on and on, lifetime after lifetime. Well, you see, that is the road to not growing up. You're just repeating things. And you're repeating things within a familiar structure. Familiar relationships, familiar people. So you don't want to just repeat. Now when we're here, we say, oh, I want to be with you always and forever through all lifetimes. And, well, we have those feelings because we care so much about people, but that's not really useful for the system to do it that way. It doesn't help us grow up. That's the slow track, not the fast track. Repeating with the same people doing the same things in the same situation is, you get in a rut. You'll make certain kinds of choices. You'll make them every time. You'll get in that same rut. You'll back yourself in the same corner, and it'll just get repetitive, and you won't grow up that much because you've been there and done that 100 times before. It's just sort of the rut you're in now. But if every time you're different, everything's different. Culture's different, race is different, sex is different, geography's different. Everything is different. Now you have to apply what you've learned, your quality of consciousness, to a wholly new set of experiences. So it's not just same old, same old. You have to be creative. You have to be open. You have to make choices. You see, otherwise you're kind of gaming the system. You're just making choices that you've always made before, but you don't want that. That turns into a rut. You want to have to make choices you've never had to make before, and you make them with the quality that you've earned. And that quality then has ramifications with the other people that are in that scenario with you, in that environment. All the rest of your friends that are also digging in the dirt with a stick. You all survive because you work so well together, because it takes a whole bunch of you digging with those sticks so that everybody can survive. And that's a joy to you. You're a part of something important. And you make your choices. You connect. It's not like, oh, I don't want a life like that. I want a life, I want to be born in a Rolls Royce, and with a silver spoon in my mouth, because that'll be easy. Well, it's not about being easy. It's about growing up. And yes, we have this sense you'd like to stay with your loved ones forever, but that's just because that's the way we feel. But if you think about it, and you've had 10,000 lives, and every one of them you had loved ones, and you were going to stay with all of them forever, well, that would be quite a train load, of people that it would take you a year just to shake hands with each one of them, if they had them all standing in a line. So it gets to be impractical as well as dysfunctional. So that's the problem with that. So if they always stayed the same, then you'd be in a rut. You wouldn't learn much. If they're all different, then it's totally impractical to do the all right, we're all going to be people digging in the dirt in the jungle. All of us are going to do that now, together. Well, that's not so good. You still have all the same relationships, even all the same dysfunctional stuff that, interacting with each other. It's not good. It's so much better to be in a new space where you get to show who you are and what you are by the choices you make. And by that, learn and grow up. That's the way we learn best. So, yes, we have those very close relationships, and those are a part of us forever. They're part of our history. They're part of who we were. And all of it is in, it's a part of us. We are the way we are now because of that relationship we had. And that's true of all the last, 100,000 relationships you've had. All of those relationships have helped make you who you are now. So in a way, you do carry that all forward. You are the sum of all the choices you've ever made. That's who you are. And what you're going to be is the sum of the choices that you're going to make. So if you'd like to be happy and fearless, then you got to make choices down that route. So it's like that. So yes, there's a spirit world in the minds of people who like to interpret their interactions with consciousness in that way, and it makes sense to them. And they don't dig in too deeply, and they don't demand too much logic, and it doesn't really have to make a lot of sense. It just has to feel right, and then it's fine. But when people start digging into it with too much logic and, it has to make sense, then there's problems. There's issues. Well, how does this work? And how does that work? And why is it that way? And then you get wadded up into stuff that's really meaningless. That doesn't have any fundamental significance anyway. So, yes, we don't get to stay with our loved ones and just hang out with them forever and on clouds playing harps. It doesn't work that way. There's not a lot of learning in that scenario. That's just be the same forever. Oh no, that's the road to destruction. We don't want to do that. We want to grow up. We don't want to be the same forever. We want everybody to move on and grow in their own way, in the best way possible. So, yes, those people are important. Yes, they remain a part of us forever because they're a part of who we are. And we can go back in the database and relive some of that, reconnect, give them a hug. We can do all that, but you're interacting with memory, with data, with information. You can go back into that database, and the database isn't just like a written database. You can go into it's like a movie and be there and actually physically hug them. You can do that too. But it's still just you and that energy as it was interacting within the probabilities of how that energy would interact with you. So if you can make it physical, or make it seem physical, where there's really a body there and you can feel the warmth and you can feel the pressure, and all of that is part of it. So you can do that. So you can still go back and say hello and give hugs and do that to people that you remember, to Uncle Fred if he was your favorite uncle. It doesn't have to just be, bodiless mind-to-mind communication. It can be very rich in its feelings and very rich in its visuals and senses and touch can all be there. But that's just the way you're interpreting the data. And if that means something important to you and helps you learn, then by all means, that's what you should do. Do it.
Now, if someone has a belief in, let's say, Christianity, and they truly believe that when they pass, they're either going to be met with their people that they, or they're going to go, they're going to go to hell or they're going to go to heaven.
Right.
There's a part where I'm assuming, because it's a strong belief, that some of that will show up for them immediately until they can grasp their situation. Like, is that how I'm assuming, that
Yeah.
somebody, you're going to expect your parents or your loved ones to be there. So there's
Hmm.
a part of you that sort of projects that when you pass, that they will all be there to celebrate or to be there with you,
Hmm.
to provide that love. Would that be correct?
Yeah. Well, for some people, yeah, depends
Yes,
on the
if they
person.
truly believe,
But
that's what I mean. Yeah.
yeah, for some people, but it doesn't last very long. You think that that might be a deep thing that would last a long time because they have so much energy into it, but it really doesn't last that long. And it's basically the system uses that to help you relax and let go and get ready for your next incarnation. So if you come in full of these ideas, even obsessed with these ideas, well, the system needs, like any communication, you need to start from where the person is that you're trying to communicate with, right? If you want to communicate with somebody, you don't say, well, here I am, you need to come see me. You got to start from where they are and then help them take steps to where you'd like them to go. That's communication. So the system sees people like that, and they're very hard over on, am I in heaven? Am I in hell? And if I'm in hell, it's going to be fire and brimstone and ugly demons and violence. And if I'm in heaven, it's going to be pearly gates and an old man with a beard sitting by the gates. And he'll see my name in a book, and the gates will open, and I'll walk through. And if you have those kinds of beliefs, then the system will play that just so you can go, oh, I'm okay.
Yes.
You see? And if you can go, oh, wow, I was worried. I'm okay. Look, this is going to be all right. Then very quickly, you let it all go. It doesn't stick around. It's not like you're stuck with that for a long time before you finally kind of, grow out of it or anything. It disappears like smoke. It's just that initial fear of what's going on. Where am I? For people who are very dogmatic in their beliefs about the afterlife, then it's, yeah, they are connected with that. So when people do regressions back, through past lives and other things, they will tell you that the last time they died, they saw their grandmother and their aunt and their sister and whatever, and they meet them and everything's fine and they reunite with the family. Well, that's the system sending them that information that they interpret that way, just so they will relax. And then they'll also say that it seems like everybody's kind of busy because even after they relax and everything seems fine and they kind of take a deep breath, then suddenly these, your brother and sister and Uncle Fred and the rest of the dead people, they're busy. They have someplace they got to go, and you have someplace you have to go. You're matriculating in, so you need to go over there and do this. And you've relaxed though, and you've let go of that fear, and now the whole thing just kind of disappears. So you'll see from those regressions that it's not like, oh yeah, and then I spent the next 6 years with my family, all the dead people in my family. It's never like that. They spend the first 6 minutes with them and then they kind of go away. That's just there to connect to those people and help them relax. Now, let's say you don't have that kind of belief and you understand how things work and why they work, then you don't have family greeting you or whatever. You just, oh, okay. Now I need to get ready and find out what I'm going to do next, and you proceed right to that. You don't have to be relaxed with scenes that comfort you first. So the system has to go where you are, and then it has to communicate with that, make a connection to that, and it has to be a positive connection, and then you can go from there. So that's typically the way that process works. So yes, you do see those things, and people who are really, really fearful, they know they're going straight to hell. They've been nasty people their whole life and always been abusive and so on. They will find that, and they may, and there are people who have NDEs, near-death experiences, that find ugly and horrible things. Not that many of them, but there's a few. That's because that's what they're expecting, and that's They just interpret it that way. You tend to find what you believe in. You tend to find evidence to support what you believe. That reminds me of the story of the guy in New York who was terrified of elephants, and he saw signs of elephants everywhere. He'd see a puddle, and he'd say, "See that puddle? That's made by an elephant's footstep. Elephant stepped there, and then when it rained, the water collected. See those bushes that are shaking over there in the breeze? There's an elephant hiding behind those bushes." And everywhere he went, he saw evidence of elephants. You see? So we tend to do that. If we have a belief, we tend to see things and interpret data in terms of those beliefs. We just are that way. So that's why people who do regressions and so on get that kind of information. That's the way they interpret the data in terms of things that they believe. But eventually it all settles out. But that's the initial step anyway, is we do that. And that's the same reason that we talked about all those, that what do we say, all the spirit world, that's interpreting the data to be comfortable for you and in the way you believe. It's the same thing. But the point is, for that, like I say, there's nothing really wrong with that. That's okay. It's comfortable for you. This idea about, well, but is it right? I don't want to do that if that's not right. Well, let that go. That's your ego wanting to be right, needing to be right. If it works for you, then it's okay. Doesn't matter whether it's right. It's not a matter of being right. It's just the way you see it. And as long as you don't get too arrogant about the way you see it, unless you're right and everybody else is wrong, disagrees with you, then it doesn't really matter too much how you see it. If you end up growing up and becoming love based on, the way you interpret your data, then it's all good.
Yeah. That was what I was going to say, is that if we bring it back to the spirit world, whatever people believe is what they're going to see. So growing up is really just about letting go of fear. So it doesn't matter how, doesn't matter what way, what you see, what you believe, as long as you are growing up towards love.
Exactly. And if the things you see and the stuff you interpret helps you do that growing up, then the stuff is good. It's good stuff. And you should keep doing it. If the things you see and the way you interpret data gets in the way, makes you angry or upset, or gets you into fights because you're right and somebody else is wrong, and you have trouble in your family, and if it creates problems, then that's not a good thing. You need to see things a different way, or you need to let everybody else be however they are, and not try to make them be the way you are. So that's we have this propensity to help everyone. Everyone out there who's not doing it right, we just have a need to help them do it right. And that boils down to self-centeredness and ego, trying to help people because they, of course, know the best way. And we just need to let that go and stop being so helpful. Let people live their life in their own way, and not be so ready to fix them by showing them the way we know is the best way. It's an easy thing to say, but it's a hard thing for most people to do. They see somebody that's doing it wrong, and they just want to help fix that. It's just the way we are, and that gets in the way, causes more hard feelings and fights and dysfunction than probably anything else. We don't respect other people, can just be the way they are and learn their own lessons in any way that takes for them to learn it, and we just interact with them in as positive way as possible. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be helpful, but you have to be a little careful about how you're being helpful. If definitely be helpful, that's good, but not by telling other people how they ought to be doing something and what they should be doing and how they should be doing it. Helpful by telling other people what to do is generally not helpful. I mean, sometimes it might be helpful. Oh, you're looking for the dry cleaners? Let's see, they're 2 blocks down and on the right. All right, now you're telling them which way to go and what to look for. Well, that's okay. That's being helpful. But you're angry at me because I don't believe in the spirit world? That's not helpful. Or you're upset because I don't believe in the spirit world and you think that maybe I know and it's not true and you've been wrong all this time. Well, that's not helpful. You see, then it becomes a belief, and beliefs are always like being behind a wall. Beliefs always cut you off from greater understanding. You believe something, then you're not open to it being any other way. You're closed about that thing. In your mind, that thing's a fact, and might well not even discuss it because it's a fact. That's what beliefs do. So it's better not to have any beliefs at all. Just kind of say, well, I think this is the way it is, but don't say that is the way it is. Just, I think it probably is, and go with that, but you're open to maybe it's not. And then you'll have less arguments and you'll feel less likely to tell people what to do and how to do it because you realize that maybe the way they're doing it is the way they need to do it. That's the way they need to do it to learn. And maybe it is a way that's going to end up hurting them in some way. Maybe they are going to hit their thumb with that hammer. But they'll learn, and maybe they have to. And if you go over and say, oh, no, you're doing it all wrong, do it this way. Well, yeah, okay, try that once. And if they kind of ignore you or say, no, I know what I'm doing or whatever, then leave it alone. Try to be helpful, but don't push your superior knowledge and understanding onto other people. Yes.
Yeah. Where did the hour go?
Is it all done already? Yeah. Oh, it is.
It's like, wow, this has like been the fastest hour I can remember in a long time.
Yeah.
Very lively discussion. I think it will get a little bit of commenting, but I think it was a good show. I think yes. We just believe what we believe, and as long as we're growing towards love, it doesn't matter.
Right. It doesn't really matter, does it? No. All that intellectual structure that we build for ourselves, if it helps us, fine, use it. If it gets in our way and makes us angry or makes other people angry with us, then, get rid of it. Find something else that works better, because what's in your intellect isn't really that important to your growing up. What's in your heart, that's important to your growing up. But what's in your intellect is just the way you convince yourself that things work because it seems right to you. But it's not really very important. And my model fits in that too. My model's just like that too. It's not that my model's right. My model's just a way of looking at reality. If you find it helpful, use it. If you don't find it helpful, don't use it. Create something that you do find helpful. Anything that helps you grow up and become love is the right thing for you to do. Yeah.
All right. Well,
that's simple. Mm-hmm.
Simple and kind of fun when you think about it. Instead of making everything so serious, we can just be, instead of, creating all this infrastructure and all of our ideas, and most of the time we're just trying to justify them, which is really all our ego. So nice conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what we're going to call this, but nice conversation. All right. You've been listening to News for the Heart. We've been getting the heart of what matters with Tom Campbell. And I don't know, to be spirit or to not be spirit.
Well, in many ways, we create our own reality. So if you want to create a reality in which there is a spirit world, then have at it if that helps you, on your life's mission. And don't get twisted around the is it right or is it wrong thing. That is not all that important. what's important is how it helps you live your life and grow up. That's what's really important.
All right. Thanks, Tom. We'll be back next month. Although you have a workshop coming up.
I have a thing coming up in Britain, and it's going to be a couple of weeks, but I think I'll be back before we have our next. I think it doesn't go that far.
Barely back.
Yeah.
Just barely back. All right. All right. Well, thanks for joining, and we'll be back next month. Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome, Laurie.